One project that I'm currently working on is a deep dive into Nintendo's producers. This is a substantial project with several interesting elements that will be the topic of a few videos in coming months, so please consider subscribing, and if you'd like to support my work, do check out the Patreon below. However, as I'm looking at the state of various teams and the various franchises, some conclusions are forming that I wanted to address in their own videos, and specifically, I wanted to take this moment to discuss Wario Land. Wario Land holds a special place in my heart. The original title was the fourth Game Boy game I ever owned, and to this day, I think it is an absolute treasure of a title. I wasn't aware until much later that there were sequel games in this series, and so I don't have quite the same familiarity or nostalgic affection for the later Wario Lands, but there's no doubt that they stand out as superlative platformers which put a distinctive twist on classic Mario-style gameplay. However, Wario Land has not had the easiest run of things in recent decades. Despite four handheld titles, a Virtual Boy game, and a 3D platformer, Wario World on the GameCube, Wario Land's last appearance was in 2008's Wario Land Shake It. Since that game ended with the same kind of mild applause most good feel games receive, the series has entered a long and perhaps permanent dormancy. Wario has still maintained regular cameo appearances in other titles, notably with Wario and Waluigi playing significant story mode roles in Mario Tennis Aces, and WarioWare has gone from strength to strength. It was striking to me that when Nintendo Today asked you to highlight franchises you enjoy, one of the options was not Wario, but rather WarioWare. I can understand why they might go down this route of focusing on WarioWare as opposed to Wario in his own right. Few spin off characters can justify one extra series, let alone two, and Wario in many respects is not the strongest of Nintendo's characters, at least in the Mario vein. It's not just that he looks very similar to Nintendo's lead, but he was originally intended as a kind of pastiche of the lead character. That sort of thing works when the character is well known by an audience and the pastiche was low profile, as was the case in the 1990s. Mario was iconic even then, but Wario was a niche Game Boy spin off, a bit of fun. But with Mario being propelled into superstardom through Nintendo's film and theme park expansions, Wario now represents a much bigger headache. They don't want brand confusion, and Wario is in that uncanny valley, not big enough to be worth pushing forward in his own right like Donkey Kong, but big enough that he risks being slightly off-putting for newer fans and family audiences who perhaps might not care for the faint whiff of garlic. WarioWare is the perfect compromise. The art style is instantly recognizable and distinct from the original Mario series, but the character is shorn of his Mario-style imagery, with the warped version of Mario's iconic cap being replaced by the pilot goggles. To many people who are casual fans, it may not even be apparent looking at WarioWare that there's a link to Mario at all. And more than this, the WarioWare universe characters like Ashley and 9 Volt do for Wario what Cranky and Diddy do for Donkey Kong, and give the sense of a coherent cast and a distinctive universe. This is all well and good, but it comes with some problems. Wario Land has now been almost abandoned. I once took a tour through the credits for the Goodfield game. Being that this was the most recent Wario Land, I thought it most likely that developers here could be sought for involvement in the next title. What I saw disappointed me. Nintendo these days takes great care in ensuring that new developers get to grips with historic franchises through remakes and remasters. Grezzo on Link's Awakening, Mages on Famicom Detective Club, even Retro Studios remastering the original Metroid Prime as they returned to Metroid Prime 4 after such a long hiatus, and perhaps more arguably, Risa Tabata's first game as producer on Paper Mario being a remake of The Thousand Year Door. The philosophy seems to be clear, and it's consistent in the way that Nintendo approach a wide variety of games. They like people to have a deep and intuitive understanding of what these games are. They don't just hand down a rulebook and say, this is what the franchise is. Even after working on many Mario games, Yoshiaki Koizumi was still pondering publicly what made Mario Mario. Wario Land Shake It appears to have had a quite different approach, however. Apart from special thanks on the first and fourth Wario games, producer at Nintendo Takahiro Harada, now seemingly retired with no new credits since 2018, was new to the series. He recounted to Nintendo Online magazine, "I especially like platform games and had always wanted to make a Wario Land sequel someday. One day I was playing a platform game for the DS released by a major game developer, and it was so much fun I thought I would like to work on a Wario Land sequel there. I did some research and learned that Ibizu-san had been involved in its development." Ibizu-san refers to the head of Goodfield, the newly spun off in its own right company, and basically they were looking for a commission from Nintendo at around the same time. As he explained, "I had told Nintendo about the new company and was asking if we could work together on something. It wasn't even like Ibiza was particularly attuned to what Wario would be like," as he explained. "When I first heard he was interested in making a Wario game, I was envisioning a shooting game, a real Western-style shoot-'em-up. For some reasons, my colleagues and I were playing lots of shooting games in those days. When I suggested that to Harada-san, though, he said, 'Why not a platform game?'" End quote. Now, this isn't a criticism of Goodfield, who have made a good sideline of doing franchise entries for various Mario and other Nintendo Universe games. Some acclaimed, like Yoshi's Woolly World and Kirby's Epic Yarn, some more tepidly received, like Yoshi's Crafted World and Princess Peach Showtime. But it shows a complete abandonment of the franchise, and when Goodfield were keen to move on, the Wario Land franchise was left with only its last set of sales to advocate for it, and these were pretty anemic. Then the Wii imploded, the Wii U flopped at launch, and a whole bunch of franchises much more celebrated than Wario Land went into the freezer. Metroid also had a 6-year-long hiatus in the 2010s. It's not difficult to see why Wario Land ended up being sidelined. The thing is, though, many other franchises have been resurrected, and Wario Land remains conspicuous for not returning. For a long time, without having researched it further, my default assumption was that their approach might be to take a new team and have them remake a prior title to get to grips with it. Not Wario Land 3, as that has appeared on the Nintendo Classics Game Boy app, but perhaps a different Wario Land. Personally, and I appreciate that this is nostalgia talking, but I really do think it's a stonkingly excellent game, I would love to see a Link's Awakening style remake of the original Wario Land title. But failing this, I also thought a far lower commitment, test the waters, this will do for the generation type release, specifically an HD port of Wario Land Shake It, could be plausible. However, even these had a key stumbling block, specifically the lack of a major Wario Land advocate with deep understanding of the series. More dedicated Wario Land fans will already have noted my significant oversight. They will already be shouting the name Takahiro Hosokawa. Despite not having been involved in Wario Land Shake It, Hosokawa started his career as a designer on Metroid 2 before directing Super Mario Land 2 and Super Mario Land 3, better known as the first Wario Land back on the Game Boy. He went on to either design or direct the Virtual Boy Wario Land 2, Wario Land 3, and Wario Land 4, as well as getting involved in a range of roles on WarioWare Touched and Game & Wario. However, in recent years he has turned his attention far more to the Nintendo franchise that he started out with, Metroid. He directed both Metroid Other M and Metroid Samus Returns, while in 2021 he became the assistant director for Metroid Dread. While on paper this may seem like a downgrade, it appears to be a case of mentorship, Nintendo style. Just as the Super Mario Odyssey producer Koichi Hayashida came to support Shiro Mori in developing Super Mario Bros. Wonder, Hosokawa appears to be grooming the assistant director of Samus Returns and the director of Metroid Dread, Fumi Hayashi, as his successor director on the 2D Metroid franchise. Given that this franchise will eventually, and potentially quite soon, lose to retirement the mighty Yoshio Sakamoto, it is absolutely critical that people with a deep understanding of this series remain at the company, and so I'm happy to see this take place. However, with Hayashi now potentially tackling his third 2D Metroid, and with Mercury Steam now becoming very familiar with Nintendo's ways and possibly able to step up more themselves, it potentially frees up Takahiro Hosokawa to focus on other things once again. And while he has evidently been at the company a good few years himself, it is striking that he has shied away from general producing duties before and has really stuck to getting involved in the nuts and bolts of game directing. Surely, therefore, there is nobody better placed to bring back Wario Land than the man who started the franchise off and saw it through its glory days. Moreover, for Nintendo, the clock is ticking if they want to be able to resurrect this franchise as an ongoing regular concern for the Switch family of systems. Hosokawa may plan to stick around making games for a very long time, but nobody would exactly blame him if he took the more traditional route of retirement, which potentially could be in the Switch 2's lifespan. Once he goes, a vast part of the institutional knowledge of how to make Wario Land games in a style true to the series' roots goes with him, something that I think is still a problem for franchises like F-Zero and Star Tropics and even Donkey Kong, which, with Donkey Kong Bonanza, needed to start with the people directly consulting Miyamoto and Koizumi because it had been so long since anybody had put together a Donkey Kong title outside of the Retro Studios team. Now, sure, there were other people who did work on those Wario Land games, but he was right in the engine room of them and is clearly able to pull his weight as a director. Is there a development team that is obviously available to him in order to make a new Wario Land game? No. I guess we could see it as a surprising less term from Mercury Steam, but it's far more likely, I think, that he would need to build a relationship with a new team. But who could be more suitable for this challenge than the man who directed Samus Returns, the title which blended Mercury Steam's brilliance with Nintendo's? And perhaps with Sakamoto even closer to retirement and talking very clearly in his Famicom Detective Club interview about having an heir on that series, Hosokawa may feel the tug of the collar to keep sticking around, keeping a watching brief on Metroid 6, but it seems actually more likely that he will remain a consultant on Metroid while developing the first new Wario Land release in nearly 2 decades. Now, this may still be a remake. This is, as I've established, the traditional way to bed in a new team, and given how Return of Samus was masterfully repurposed into Samus Returns for the 3DS, it seems that Hosokawa would have the confidence to wrestle a Game Boy title into the present day. But I don't think they need to start from scratch and work from the outside in to find the logic of how a series works, as a few teams have had to do recently, notably the Donkey Kong Bonanza group. However, there is another possibility. Hosokawa could be tasked with not just reviving Wario Land, but reinventing it. As someone who had worked on both the land and ware variants of the series, he could be ideally placed to bridge the land-ware divide. Is there a way to graphically update Wario Land so that there is a greater sense of cohesion with the WarioWare version of the character? The kind of brand consistency which might better suit a franchise than having two drastically different versions of the character. Granted, Zelda and even occasionally Mario can get away with this, but Wario is a much smaller franchise. WarioWare also has the benefit of a good chunk of supporting characters who might be fun to include and might add to the Wario Land gameplay. There's a slight risk of brand confusion with the distinctive WarioWare series, but I don't think this is such a problem because WarioWare is still a niche franchise. Its biggest ever seller didn't crack 2.5 million, and it doesn't sell at full price. Mario Party and Super Mario Bros. Wonder are visually distinct, and yet there's still enough connective tissue between the two in terms of looks that the audience can easily transition from one to the other without becoming too confused. Obviously, there is also Paper Mario and a few other types of Mario, but by and large, the Mario titles have a consistent appearance. I mentioned this as a possibility, but I don't think it's the likeliest one. After all, Nintendo is incredibly traditional a lot of the time. Even something as groundbreaking as Bonanza was hugely reverential towards the country games, with tributes all the way through the game, while F-Zero 99, Mario vs. Donkey Kong, Another Code Recollection, and Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp show that they generally want to capture the spirit of a game as it was at an early stage in its lifespan. This makes sense. They work hard on their titles and they're proud of them, so they don't approach games generally thinking that they need a ground-up remake. Sure, Samus Returns could exploit the vastly greater power of the 3DS compared to the Game Boy, but it still palpably builds on the legacy of the Metroid franchise as it has existed all these years. In terms of a forecast, then, I used to be on the very negative end of the odds for a Wario Land revival. I now think it's 50% likely that we will see one by the end of 2027, and if we do, I think the chances are 70% that Hosokawa will be involved. In the event of a resurrection, I'd say 50% it will be a remake or a remaster of a prior Game Boy title, with a brand new title or a Shake It return being far less likely. And personally, as someone who still harbours such happy memories of my first Wario Land game all those years ago, I would be extremely excited to see whatever they do next. If you'd like to support the channel on Patreon, the link is below. Please also share this to rally the call for Wario Land games, but otherwise, I'm just appreciative that you are here, and I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.